Let's start a new page in our sketchbook. So you might be familiar with gouache, but you might not. I feel like sometimes people are more familiar with watercolour and acrylic, and gouache really has its own character and its own temperament as a paint. I've also got some watercolour as well, so I can show you the difference. So they look really similar in the palette at the moment. I'm going to start with the gouache, so I'm just mixing a little bit of water with it so we get a nice smooth consistency. And when I'm mixing the paint, I kind of roll my brush from side to side, swirl it around, make sure that there's low lumps of paint, that it's all evenly distributed, and that there's no streaks of unmixed pigment. That's where these palettes with these round wells are really useful. So this is the gouache. So as I put that on, you can see it's really smooth and even. There's not a lot of variation in the colour, and it's covering the paper with this really smooth, even finish. And now we're going to compare it to the watercolour. So you can see the watercolour is really different. We've got all this variation in tone, so it's kind of pooling at the bottom of the brush stroke. The gouache is much more flat and even and opaque, and the watercolour is transparent, and you have much more variation in tone. So when we're mixing a colour, I tend to think of it a bit like mixing a cake. I'm going to start with the biggest ingredient. So I'm going to mix some pink, and I know that we need lots of white, so I've started with the white in the palette first. Sometimes people make the mistake of mixing sort of half white, half red, and then it ends up too dark and they keep having to add lots and lots of white. A little bit goes a really long way, so that's a tiny bit of red, and already we're starting to get a peach. And if we wanted, could add a tiny bit of this yellow as well to create a really bright peach. So again, I'm really swirling my brush around. What I don't want is kind of streaks of unmixed red or yellow when I'm painting. I want it all to be nice and mixed, just scraping the excess off and kind of rolling the brush so it's all nice and evenly coated with the paint. This is straight out of the palette, and it's quite dry, and we're getting that really smooth, even, matte gouache finish with some slightly dry edges. In another section of my palette, I'm going to water it down a little bit more. Watering your paint down a bit more can make it easier to control, but you can also get a slightly less even finish, so it's just finding the consistency that works for you. So I've added a little bit more water, and you can see that the heart doesn't have those rough edges, it's kind of smoother. And then if I added lots more water, it might dry a little bit less evenly and it'd be a bit less opaque. As these are drying, you can see the colour changing. This first one is starting to go darker and lighter, and then the lightest. So if I paint another heart now, so I'm using the exact same paint mix that we used at the beginning, you can see the difference, that this one looks lighter and this one looks darker. And they're the exact same paint, it's just this one's more dry. So as your paint dries, it's going to get darker, and we can compare it to what's in the palette, and the wettest paint is going to change the colour the most. So this is why it's really important to always paint a little swatch before you do your final painting, because you might mix it in the palette and think, okay, that looks a really nice light pink. And then when you actually get it on the paper on your sketchbook and it's really dry, like that's a much darker pink, so it might not be the colour that you want. So paint your swatch, wait for it to dry completely, and then you can adjust the colour if you need to. Paint another swatch, wait for that to dry, and when you're happy with it, then you can go ahead and paint your final thing. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to the channel. If you want to learn more about me and my process, check out my online course at Domestika.